I'm Skylar, 28 years old, standing in the grand ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton during my parents' 25th wedding anniversary celebration. 150 guests in their finest attire had just heard my mother Margaret announce to everyone that I was this family's biggest mistake. The champagne flute in my hand trembled as every pair of eyes turned to stare at me with a mixture of shock and pity. But instead of crying or running away like she expected, I said one sentence that changed everything forever. Before I reveal what I said that destroyed 28 years of lies, tell me where you're watching from. If you've ever been the family scapegoat, please subscribe. Now let me tell you how one sentence ended decades of abuse. Growing up in the Patterson family meant growing up in the shadow of perfection, or at least the appearance of it. My father Robert was the CEO of one of the largest pharmaceutical companies on the East Coast, a position he'd inherited from his father, and expanded into an empire worth hundreds of millions. My mother Margaret was the quintessential socialite, serving on every charity board that mattered, hosting galas that made the society pages, and maintaining a reputation as spotless as her white marble mansion in Greenwich. I had two older siblings who fit perfectly into this gilded world. Alexander, 32, followed father's footsteps, but exceeded them, becoming a renowned cardiac surgeon at Mount Sinai. Madison, 30, chose law instead of medicine, but still impressed everyone by making partner at one of Manhattan's most prestigious firms before her 30th birthday. Then there was me, Skylar, 28, the family disappointment who chose to be a freelance writer instead of something respectable. The differences between us had been apparent from the beginning, and not just in our career choices. Alexander and Madison inherited mother's classic Nordic features, with their golden blonde hair, crystal blue eyes, and statuesque heights. They looked like they'd stepped out of a Ralph Lauren advertisement, all elegant lines and effortless grace. I, on the other hand, was 5'3", with dark brown hair that curled rebelliously, no matter how much product mother's hairstylist used, brown eyes that she said looked muddy, and what she called a peasant build, despite my size 4 frame. "You look just like your grandmother," visitors would sometimes say, referring to my father's mother, who had passed when I was 5. Mother would always tighten her lips at these comments and quickly change the subject. I never understood why comparing me to Grandma Rose was such an insult until much later. The discrimination started early and was consistent. Alexander and Madison attended Exeter Academy, the boarding school that had educated generations of America's elite. When my turn came, Mother enrolled me in the local public school, explaining to her friends that I needed more specialized attention that private schools couldn't provide. The truth was that I was a straight-A student who tested in the 99th percentile, but acknowledging that would have meant acknowledging me. While my siblings had private tutors for SAT prep language lessons in French and Mandarin and summer programs at Oxford, I was told to be grateful for the public library and free online courses. Alexander's 17th birthday party had 200 guests and a performance by a Grammy-winning artist. Madison's Sweet 16 was featured in Town & Country magazine. For my 16th birthday, I received a card with a $50 bill and a reminder not to get my hopes up about college funding. "We have to be realistic about your limitations," Mother had said when I showed her my acceptance letter to Northwestern with a full academic scholarship. "Your siblings have real potential. We can't waste resources on pipe dreams." The irony was that I'd earned that scholarship entirely on my own merit, while Alexander and Madison's Ivy League educations were purchased with donations large enough to name buildings. But in Mother's narrative, they were brilliant, and I was lucky. My father Robert was rarely home enough to witness the daily cruelties, and when he was, he seemed to exist in a bubble of willful ignorance. He'd pat my head absently when I tried to tell him about winning the state essay contest, already scrolling through emails about mergers and acquisitions. The only time I remember him really looking at me was when I graduated as valedictorian of my high school. He'd seemed surprised, as if he'd forgotten I was capable of achievement. "Why didn't anyone tell me she was smart?" he'd asked Mother, who had refused to attend the ceremony, claiming a migraine. "Book smart isn't life smart," she'd replied, and that was the end of his interest. I pieced together the reason for their contempt through overheard conversations and careless comments. I was born when Mother was 42, a full decade after Madison. The pregnancy had been difficult, requiring bed rest that prevented her from attending the social season. She'd gained weight she could never quite lose, developed stretch marks that no treatment could fully erase, and missed being elected president of the country club by 3 votes because she'd been hospitalized with complications during the crucial campaigning period. Skylar ruined my body and my life trajectory. I'd heard her tell her sister Catherine during one of their wine-fueled lunch dates when they thought I was at school. If it weren't for her, I'd be heading the Met Gala committee right now instead of begging for a seat at the table. Catherine had made sympathetic noises, but I'd caught her looking at me sometimes with an expression I couldn't quite read. It wasn't contempt like Mother's or indifference like Father's. It was something closer to guilt, though I wouldn't understand why until much later. The extended family followed Mother's lead in treating me as the spare part nobody ordered. At family gatherings, Alexander would be asked about his surgical residency, Madison about her cases, and I would be asked if I was still playing around with writing. When I published my first novel at 26, a literary fiction piece that received excellent reviews and modest sales, Mother told everyone I'd self-published a little hobby project. The truth was that Penguin Random House had picked it up, but she couldn't bear to admit I'd achieved something without the family name opening doors. The worst part was how my siblings absorbed and reflected Mother's attitude. Alexander would introduce me at events as his little sister, who was still finding herself, even though I was 28 with 2 published books. Madison would laugh about her creative sister, who thought typing all day constituted a career. They weren't deliberately cruel, just casually dismissive in the way you might be about a piece of furniture you'd grown accustomed to ignoring. I'd tried to leave several times to cut ties and build a life away from their poison, but every time I'd gather the courage, Mother would sense it and deploy just enough manipulation to keep me tethered. She'd suddenly need help with a charity event only I could manage, or Father would have a health scare that turned out to be nothing but required family unity. I was trapped in a web of obligation and emotional manipulation that I couldn't quite escape. The announcement of Alexander's engagement 3 months before the anniversary party had sent Mother into overdrive. Victoria Pembroke was everything Mother had dreamed of in a daughter-in-law. Her father was a senator, her mother came from old railroad money, and she herself was a Harvard-educated art curator who looked like she'd been bred in a laboratory to produce the perfect society wife. The engagement had been featured in the New York Times, complete with a photo shoot at the Pembroke estate in the Hamptons. Madison's promotion to partner at her firm a month later had added another jewel to Mother's crown. At 29, she was the youngest partner in the firm's history, a fact Mother managed to work into every conversation regardless of the topic. The combination of Alexander's society engagement and Madison's professional triumph had made Mother insufferable, even by her usual standards. Meanwhile, my second novel had just been nominated for the National Book Award, one of the highest honors in American literature. When I'd told the family at dinner, Mother had literally laughed. "Oh, Skylar, they nominate hundreds of books for these things. It's like those participation trophies they give children now. Don't get your hopes up about actually winning anything." The fact that only 5 books were nominated in each category didn't seem to matter. In her mind, anything I achieved was automatically less valuable than my siblings' accomplishments. Alexander saving lives was real work. Madison defending corporations was real work. Me spending a year crafting a 300-page exploration of generational trauma was just playing with words. The 3 months leading up to my parents' anniversary party were when everything began to unravel, though I didn't know it at the time. Mother had decided that the 25th anniversary celebration needed to be the social event of the season, a display of Patterson family perfection that would cement their position at the apex of Connecticut society. She hired Bergdorf Goodman's event planning team, the same people who organized state dinners and celebrity weddings. The budget was obscene, more than most people's annual salaries, but Father just nodded and signed checks. He'd been even more absent than usual, flying to Switzerland and Singapore for business trips that seemed to multiply every week. "This party needs to showcase our family's success," Mother announced at one of her mandatory family dinners. "Alexander, you'll give a toast about family values and tradition. Madison, you'll speak about achievement and ambition. Skylar, just try to look presentable and don't talk about your writing. Nobody wants to hear about made-up stories at a celebration of real accomplishment." I'd bitten my tongue so hard it bled, but I'd nodded and smiled like always. What Mother didn't know was that I'd already decided this would be my last family event. My third novel had been picked up with an advance large enough to ensure my financial independence, and I'd been secretly apartment hunting in Portland, Oregon, as far from Connecticut as I could get without leaving the continental United States. The preparation for the party intensified as the date approached. Mother had separate meetings with Alexander and Madison about their speeches, their outfits, even their plus ones. Madison was bringing James, a fellow lawyer from a good family. Alexander would have Victoria, of course, draped in diamonds that cost more than most people's houses. For me, there were only criticisms and demands. "You need to lose 10 pounds before the party," Mother informed me 6 weeks out, despite the fact that I was already thin. "That dress I selected for you won't look right if you're bloated." The dress she'd chosen was a pale pink monstrosity with ruffles and bows that would have looked juvenile on a teenager, let alone a 28-year-old woman. When I suggested wearing the elegant black sheath dress I'd bought myself, she'd actually gasped, as if I'd suggested showing up naked. "Black at an anniversary celebration? Are you trying to curse my marriage? You'll wear what I selected, or you won't come at all." The threat was empty, and we both knew it. She needed the picture-perfect family tableau, even if I was the smudge on an otherwise pristine portrait. But something in her tone that day was different, sharper, more vindictive than usual. It was as if the approaching celebration was bringing out not just her need for perfection, but her deep, visceral resentment of my existence. 3 weeks before the party, I was helping clean out the attic at Mother's insistence. She claimed she needed space for storing anniversary gifts, though I suspected she just wanted me out of sight while she met with the florist. The attic was a museum of our childhood, or rather Alexander and Madison's childhood. Boxes of their trophies, albums of their achievements, framed newspaper clippings of their successes. I found one box of my things shoved in a corner under a leak that had damaged most of the contents. But beneath the moldy report cards and water-stained artwork was a manila envelope that had somehow stayed dry. Inside were documents that changed everything I thought I knew about my life. The first was a birth certificate, but not the one I'd seen before. This one listed the mother as Emma Thompson, not Margaret Patterson. The father was listed as unknown. The date was right, the hospital was right, but the name was wrong. Or was it? The second document was a legal adoption paper dated 3 months after my birth. Margaret and Robert Patterson adopting baby Skylar from Emma Thompson. The third piece of paper made my hands shake. It was a death certificate for Emma Thompson dated the same day as my birth, cause of death complications from childbirth. The last item in the envelope was a photograph of a young woman who looked exactly like me. Same dark hair, same brown eyes, same stubborn chin. She was heavily pregnant standing next to a younger Margaret, and the resemblance between them was unmistakable. Sisters. Emma Thompson had been Margaret's sister. I sat in that dusty attic for an hour, pieces of my life suddenly clicking into place like a horrible puzzle. The contempt, the resentment, the constant reminder that I was a mistake. I wasn't Margaret's biological daughter. I was her sister's child, a reminder of something she'd rather forget. I carefully photographed every document with my phone before returning them to the envelope. Then I did something I'd never done before. I searched through more boxes looking for anything else about Emma Thompson. I found her high school yearbook tucked inside Margaret's wedding album. Emma had been 17 when she died. 17 years old, pregnant, and hidden away like a shameful secret. Over the next 2 weeks, I researched quietly. Emma Thompson had been a senior at a prestigious boarding school when she got pregnant. She'd been withdrawn from school, hidden away, erased from the family narrative. The father, according to a gossipy article I found in archived local newspapers from 28 years ago, was rumored to be someone prominent, someone married, someone whose identity the Thompson family had paid good money to keep quiet. Catherine, Mother's sister, who always looked at me so strangely, had been Emma's best friend according to the yearbook. The guilt in her eyes made sense now. She knew. She'd always known. I confronted no one, said nothing, but I prepared. I made copies of everything, created a file with all my research, and waited. If they wanted to call me the family mistake, I'd show them what the real mistake was, 28 years of lies. The week before the party, Mother's cruelty reached new heights. She critiqued everything from my posture to my laugh, demanded I get professional makeup because my face needed all the help it could get, and informed me that I'd be seated at the back table with distant relatives and plus ones. "We need the immediate family at the head table for photos," she explained. "You understand?" I understood perfectly. In her mind, I wasn't immediate family. I never had been. The day of the party, I made my own preparations. I didn't lose the 10 pounds she demanded. I didn't get the professional makeup that would make me look like someone else. And I definitely didn't wear the pink monstrosity she'd selected. Instead, I put on the black sheath dress that fit me perfectly, styled my hair the way I liked it, and tucked printed copies of those documents into my clutch. As I looked in the mirror before leaving for the hotel, I saw Emma Thompson's daughter staring back at me. For the first time in my life, I knew exactly who I was, and in a few hours, everyone else would know too. The ballroom at the Ritz-Carlton had been transformed into what could only be described as Margaret Patterson's fantasy of heaven. Crystal chandeliers cast soft light over tables draped in ivory silk, each centerpiece a small fortune of white orchids and roses. A string quartet played softly in the corner, while guests in designer gowns and custom suits mingled with champagne flutes that never seemed to empty. I arrived precisely at 7, neither early enough to seem eager, nor late enough to draw attention. The moment I walked through the doors in my black dress, I saw Mother's face tighten with rage. She was holding court near the entrance in a champagne-colored gown that probably cost more than most people's cars greeting guests with air kisses and practiced laughs. "Skylar," she hissed when I approached her smile never wavering for the benefit of onlookers. "I specifically told you what to wear." "You did," I agreed calmly. "I chose not to listen." Before she could respond, Judge Harrison and his wife approached to offer congratulations, and Mother had to shift back into performance mode. I moved past her into the party, noting how she immediately began explaining to the Harrisons that I was going through an artistic phase and thought I was making some sort of statement. The room was divided into clear hierarchies. The head table sat on a raised platform draped in gold-accented linens with a perfect view of the entire ballroom. Place cards in elegant calligraphy marked seats for Robert Margaret Alexander with Victoria and Madison with James. My name was nowhere to be found on that table. I located my seat at table 12 in the back corner with Robert's secretary, the photographer's assistant, and great-aunt Mildred, who was 93 and spent most events asleep. The message was clear: you're here because we need you for the family photo, nothing more. "Skylar, oh my God, congratulations on the National Book Award nomination." I turned to find Julia Chen, my editor from Random House, approaching with genuine warmth. She wasn't supposed to be here, but then I spotted her husband David, who worked at Father's company. "That's incredible news," David added, shaking my hand enthusiastically. "Julia had me read your book last week. It's phenomenal. You must be so proud." "What nomination?" Alexander had appeared beside us, Victoria attached to his arm like an expensive accessory. He looked confused, which meant Mother hadn't even mentioned it to him. "Skylar's novel is up for the National Book Award," Julia explained clearly, surprised he didn't know. "It's one of the most prestigious literary honors in America. Only 5 books get nominated in each category." "Oh, the writing thing," Alexander said dismissively, already losing interest. "That's nice, like a participation trophy, right?" Julia's mouth fell open. "A participation trophy? It's the National Book Award. Past winners include William Faulkner and Philip Roth." But Alexander had already moved on, pulling Victoria toward more important people. Julia looked at me with sympathy, and something else, maybe recognition of what I dealt with. "Your family doesn't appreciate you, do they?" she said quietly. "You could say that," I replied, watching Mother guide Alexander and Victoria to a group of hospital board members, her hands gesturing animatedly as she no doubt shared his latest surgical triumph. As the cocktail hour progressed, I noticed interesting dynamics. Father seemed distracted, checking his phone constantly and stepping out for calls. Mother was in her element, gliding from group to group, but there was an edge to her performance, something brittle beneath the polish. Madison kept drinking more than usual, and James seemed uncomfortable, like he'd rather be anywhere else. The announcement for dinner came at 8, and guests found their seats. The head table looked like a magazine spread with its perfect family tableau. Well, almost perfect. The 6th chair sat empty, a glaring reminder that someone was missing from the family portrait. The first courses were served with military precision, while Mother's friend Charlotte, the evening's MC, shared anecdotes about the Patterson family's charitable contributions and social achievements. Every story somehow circled back to Alexander or Madison. 25 years of marriage had apparently produced only 2 noteworthy children. During the main course, various guests stood to share toasts. Robert's business partner praised their partnership and Margaret's gracious hosting. Margaret's charity co-chair gushed about her dedication to causes. Alexander's mentor from Mount Sinai called him the future of cardiac surgery. Madison's managing partner joked about her ruthless negotiation skills. No one mentioned me. It was as if I didn't exist. "This is weird, right?" whispered the photographer's assistant sitting beside me. "You're their daughter, too." I just smiled and sipped my wine, waiting. At 9 o'clock, Margaret rose from her chair and moved to the microphone. The room fell silent, everyone turning to watch the Queen of Connecticut Society hold court. She looked radiant in the soft lighting, every inch the successful wife and mother she'd crafted herself to be. "Thank you all for joining us tonight to celebrate 25 remarkable years," she began, her voice carrying perfectly through the room's acoustics. "When Robert and I married, we dreamed of building something special, a family that would embody the values we hold dear: excellence, ambition, and success." She paused for effect, gesturing toward the head table. "I'm proud to say we exceeded even our wildest dreams. Our son Alexander," she beamed at him, "graduated summa cum laude from Harvard Medical School and is now the youngest chief surgical resident in Mount Sinai's history. He's saved countless lives and will soon marry the lovely Victoria Pembroke, uniting 2 of America's finest families." Applause rippled through the room. Alexander stood briefly waving with practiced humility. "Our daughter Madison," Margaret continued, "made partner at Preston Worthington and Hayes before her 30th birthday, the youngest in the firm's 100-year history. She's a fierce advocate for her clients and a shining example of what determination can achieve." More applause. Madison raised her glass in acknowledgement. "These 2 remarkable individuals are the crown jewels of the Patterson family, proof that with the right breeding education and values, anything is possible." Someone in the crowd called out, "What about your other daughter, Skylar?" I saw Mother's jaw clench, her perfect smile freezing for just a moment. Then she laughed, a tinkling sound that held no warmth. "Oh, Skylar," she said, and the way she said my name made it sound like something distasteful she'd stepped in. "Well, every family has one, don't they?" Nervous laughter from some guests. Others looked uncomfortable. "She's here somewhere," Mother continued, waving vaguely toward the back of the room. "Skylar is, how do I put this delicately? She's this family's biggest mistake." The room went absolutely silent. Someone actually gasped. "We've tried everything with her," Mother continued, seemingly oblivious to the horror on many faces. "The best schools wouldn't take her. Tutors gave up. She refuses to pursue a real career, insisting on this writing hobby, despite our attempts to guide her toward something substantial. 28 years of disappointment, but we love her anyway in the way you love a rescue dog that can't be trained." "Margaret," Robert said sharply from his seat, but she wasn't done. "Some people are just born wrong, aren't they? No amount of good breeding or opportunity can fix that. But we include her in family events because that's what good Christians do. We embrace our crosses to bear." I stood up. The movement was so sudden that my chair scraped loudly against the floor. Every head in the room turned toward me. Mother's face showed a flicker of satisfaction, probably thinking I was about to run from the room in tears, giving her the dramatic victim moment she craved. Instead, I walked toward the microphone with measured steps, my heels clicking against the marble floor in the silence. Mother tried to block me, but I sidestepped her easily. "Sit down," she hissed. "Don't you dare make a scene at my anniversary party." I took the microphone from her hand and faced the room full of Connecticut's elite people who'd known me since childhood, but never really seen me. My heart was pounding, but my voice was steady. "You're right, Mom. I am a mistake." I paused, meeting her eyes. "Your sister's mistake that you've been covering up for 28 years. The words hung in the air like a bomb detonation. Margaret's champagne flute slipped from her hand, shattering on the marble floor with a sound that seemed to echo in the absolute silence. The color drained from her face so completely that her expensive foundation looked like a mask against her sudden pallor. "What did you just say?" Robert stood up from the head table, his voice carrying a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. "Sister's mistake," Alexander said, looking between me and Mother. "What sister?" "You don't have a sister, Margaret," Madison added, but her voice was uncertain, like she was trying to convince herself. That's when Catherine, Mother's sister, let out a sound somewhere between a gasp and a sob. "Oh God, Margaret, you promised you'd never tell." The room erupted in whispers, but I raised my hand and surprisingly everyone quieted. Maybe it was the calm in my voice or the way I stood there without shaking, but they sensed this was something monumental. I reached into my clutch and pulled out the documents I'd carefully folded. My real mother was Emma Thompson, Margaret's younger sister. She died giving birth to me when she was 17 years old. "Stop this immediately!" Margaret lunged for the microphone, but Robert caught her arm. "Let her speak," he said, and there was something dangerous in his voice. I unfolded the first paper. "This is my original birth certificate. Mother Emma Thompson, father unknown. Except the father isn't unknown, is he, Mom?" I looked directly at Judge Harrison, who was sitting at table 3 with his wife. His face had gone gray. "Emma was sent away to hide the pregnancy." I continued, my voice growing stronger. "Hidden because she was 17 and pregnant by a married man who happened to be Robert's business partner at the time." Mrs. Harrison stood up so fast her chair fell backward. "William," she turned to her husband. "William, tell me this isn't true." Judge Harrison couldn't meet her eyes. The entire room watched as one of Connecticut's most powerful men crumbled under the weight of a 28-year-old secret. "Margaret adopted me to save the family from scandal," I said, holding up the adoption papers. "She couldn't let her sister's baby go into foster care. People would ask questions, so she took me in and spent the next 28 years punishing me for existing." "This is preposterous." Margaret finally found her voice. "These are obviously fabricated documents. Schuyler has always had an overactive imagination. Did I imagine this?" I pulled out the photograph of Emma pregnant and standing next to Margaret. She looked exactly like me. Or rather, I look exactly like her. That's why you could never stand to look at me, isn't it? Every time you saw my face, you saw Emma. Catherine stood up, tears streaming down her face. "It's true. Every word is true. Emma was my best friend. She made mistakes, yes, but she was just a child. A brilliant, beautiful child who died terrified and alone because the family was more concerned about reputation than her life." "Catherine, shut up," Margaret snarled, all pretense of elegance gone. "No, I won't shut up anymore," Catherine shot back. "I've kept this secret for 28 years, watched you treat that girl like garbage when she's your own blood. Emma loved that baby. In the few hours she had before she died, she held Schuyler and made me promise to make sure she was loved. And I failed. I let you turn her into the family scapegoat because I was too cowardly to stand up to you." Madison had started crying. "We had a cousin growing up thinking she was our sister, and you made us treat her like she was inferior." Alexander looked physically ill. "My education, the opportunities, the trust fund. Where did the money really come from?" I looked at Judge Harrison again. "Would you like to tell them, or should I?" He stood slowly, his wife stepping away from him as if he was contaminated. "Margaret came to me after Emma died. She said she'd raise the baby as her own if I helped with the financial burden." "You paid them off," his wife said, her voice hollow. "You paid them to hide your illegitimate child." "It was more complex than that," he started, but she was already walking out, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. "200,000 initially," I said, having found the bank records in my research. "Then 50,000 a year for 18 years. That's where Alexander and Madison's education funds really came from. Blood money, literally." "You knew?" Robert turned to Margaret, and the betrayal in his voice was sharp enough to cut. "You knew our children's advantages came from hiding your sister's death and your niece's true identity." "I did what was best for everyone," Margaret said, but her voice was losing its conviction. "Best for everyone." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Emma died at 17. She died alone except for medical staff because the family was too ashamed to be with her. You told everyone she was studying abroad then, that she'd decided to stay in Europe. You erased her completely." "She made her choices," Margaret said coldly. "She was 17. The room flinched at my raised voice. She was a child who made one mistake with a man who should have known better. I looked at Judge Harrison's retreating back as he tried to leave quietly. A man in a position of power who took advantage of a teenage girl and then paid to make the problem disappear. "This is destroying everything," Margaret said, looking around at the horrified faces of her society friends. "Everything I've built." "Everything you built?" I asked. "You built it on Emma's grave. You took her baby, her death, and her memory, and you used them to create this perfect family facade. But you could never quite forgive me for surviving when she didn't. Could you?" The truth of it was written on her face. For the first time in 28 years, Margaret Patterson had no comeback, no cutting remark, no dismissive laugh. She stood there exposed as the elaborate construction of her life crumbled around her. "The saddest part," I said, addressing the room but looking at my siblings, "is that I would have loved being your daughter. If you'd just let me. I didn't need the advantages or the money or the status. I just needed a family. But you were so consumed with hatred for Emma's choices that you couldn't see past them to the child who had nothing to do with them." Alexander stood up and walked toward me. For a moment I thought he might defend, Mother might try to restore order to their shattered world. Instead, he pulled me into a hug, the first real embrace he'd given me in 20 years. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "God, Skylar, I'm so sorry. We were kids, but that's no excuse. We followed her lead because it was easier than questioning why our sister was treated like an outsider." Madison joined us, mascara streaming down her face. "All those times you tried to show us your writing, your achievements, and we dismissed them because Mom said they didn't matter. We were horrible to you." "The writing thing," I said with a bitter smile. "That's what you called it today, Alexander. My National Book Award nomination is just the writing thing." Julia Chen stood up from her table. "For what it's worth, Skylar is one of the most talented writers of her generation. Her work explores themes of family trauma and identity with a depth that most writers never achieve. The literary community recognizes her as a major voice, even if her own family doesn't." "None of that matters now," Margaret said desperately. "We can work through this as a family, privately." "Privately?" I asked. "Like Emma's pregnancy, like her death, like my entire existence. No Mom. You announced to everyone that I was this family's mistake. Now everyone knows which family mistakes you were really talking about." Robert hadn't said anything for several minutes, but now he spoke with quiet authority. "Margaret, we're done." She turned to him shocked. "Robert, you can't be serious. It was 28 years ago." 28 years of lies," he corrected. 28 years of watching you psychologically torture a child for the crime of being born. I was complicit because I was too busy with work to pay attention, but that ends now." He turned to me, and for the first time in my life, my father really looked at me. "Skylar, I have failed you in every way a father can fail a child. I let my wife's cruelty go unchecked. I chose ignorance over involvement. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know that I will spend whatever time I have left trying to make amends." The party was effectively over. Guests were leaving quietly, murmuring among themselves. Tomorrow, this would be the scandal of the decade in Connecticut society. The Patterson family's perfect image revealed as a carefully constructed lie built on a teenage girl's grave. Charlotte, the MC and Mother's closest friend, approached the microphone I'd abandoned. "I think perhaps we should all give the family some privacy." "No," I said firmly. "They've had 28 years of privacy to deal with this. Tonight, everything is in the open." I turned back to Margaret one last time. "You called me this family's mistake, but the only mistake was thinking that lies could stay buried forever, that you could build happiness on someone else's tragedy. Emma deserved better. I deserved better." "Where will you go?" Madison asked, as if suddenly realizing I might leave. "Anywhere but here," I replied. "I've spent 28 years trying to earn love from people who were incapable of giving it. I'm done." As I walked toward the exit, people stepped aside to create a path. Some looked at me with pity, others with admiration, and a few with recognition of their own family dynamics reflected in mine. At the doorway, I turned back one more time. The head table sat empty except for Margaret, who remained standing among the ruins of her anniversary party. The golden lighting that had seemed so warm now cast harsh shadows on her face, aging her decades in minutes. The elaborate centerpieces looked garish. The silk linen seemed to mock the ugliness they'd been covering. "Happy anniversary," I said, and then I walked out of their lives. The immediate aftermath of the party was chaos, but I wasn't there to see most of it. I'd walked straight to my car and driven home to my small apartment, the one Mother had never bothered to visit, because it wasn't impressive enough. My phone exploded with calls and texts, but I turned it off and poured myself a glass of wine, sitting in the silence and feeling something I hadn't experienced in years: peace. Meanwhile, the Patterson family empire was crumbling in real time. According to Alexander, who called from his car an hour after I left, Father had walked out of the party without saying another word to Mother. Margaret had tried to maintain composure, dismissing the remaining guests with claims that I'd had a mental breakdown, but nobody believed her. The documents I'd shown were too specific, Catherine's corroboration too damning, and Judge Harrison's guilty exit too obvious. "Mom's lost it," Alexander said over the phone. "She's calling all her society friends trying to do damage control, but Charlotte already told her she needs to step down from all the charity boards. They can't have this kind of scandal attached to their fundraising efforts." By morning, the story had spread through Connecticut's elite social circles like wildfire. Someone, probably one of the younger guests, had recorded my entire revelation on their phone. The video went viral on local social media groups with headlines like "Society Queen's Dark Secret Exposed at Anniversary Party" and "The Real Housewives of Connecticut Could Never." Madison came to my apartment that afternoon looking haggard. I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about every birthday party, every Christmas, every family vacation where you were either left out or brought along as an afterthought. We were so cruel. "You were children following your mother's lead," I said, surprising myself with the lack of anger in my voice. "I was 30 years old last week," Madison countered. "I haven't been a child for a long time, but I still treated you like you were worthless. I'm a lawyer, for God's sake. I fight for justice every day, but I couldn't see the injustice happening in my own family." She pulled out her laptop and showed me something that made my jaw drop. It was a legal document properly notarized and filed. "I'm restructuring my trust fund," she explained. "The money that came from your biological father, I'm putting it in an account for you. It's about $3 million with interest." "Madison, it's not about want. It's about what's right. That money was paid to hide your existence. It should have been yours from the beginning." Alexander had done something similar, though he'd taken a different approach. He'd liquidated his investment portfolio and donated the equivalent amount to a charity for teenage mothers established in Emma Thompson's name. The press release, which he'd had his hospital's PR department write, explicitly stated that the fund was created in memory of a young woman who died due to family shame and societal pressure. The real earthquake came 3 days later when Father's lawyer contacted me. Robert was filing for divorce and had already moved into a hotel in the city. But more than that, he'd hired a forensic accountant to go through 28 years of finances. "Your father wants to make things right," the lawyer explained. "He's calculated what should have been spent on your upbringing had you been treated equally to your siblings. It comes to approximately $2.4 million. "I don't want his money," I said automatically. "He expected you'd say that. He asked me to tell you that this isn't charity or an attempt to buy forgiveness. It's restitution. There's a difference." Meanwhile, Margaret was fighting a war on all fronts. The country club had suspended her membership pending a board review. Every charity she'd been involved with had politely requested her resignation. The society friends she'd cultivated for decades suddenly found themselves too busy to return her calls. But the most devastating blow came from an unexpected source. Judge Harrison's wife, Patricia, had filed for divorce and gone scorched earth. She gave an exclusive interview to the Connecticut Gazette where she revealed not just the affair with Emma, but 2 other affairs William had concealed over their 40-year marriage. "My husband destroyed a child and then paid to hide his crime," Patricia said in the interview. "Emma Thompson was 17 years old. In today's terminology, we'd call William a predator. But 28 years ago, the family just called her fast and sent her away to die alone." The interview triggered something unexpected. Other women started coming forward. Not about William specifically, but about the culture of Connecticut's elite families. Stories of hidden pregnancies, hushed assaults, and generations of women sacrificed to maintain appearances. My confrontation at the party had opened a floodgate. Catherine became an unexpected ally. She'd been carrying guilt for nearly 3 decades and seemed determined to make amends. She brought me photo albums I'd never seen full of pictures of Emma. She was brilliant, Catherine told me over coffee at my apartment. Smarter than Margaret, more talented than anyone in the family. She wanted to be a writer, actually. She had notebooks full of stories. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd become what my biological mother had dreamed of being, despite every attempt to crush that dream. Margaret was always jealous of Emma, Catherine continued. Emma was prettier, more charming, more beloved by their parents. When Emma got pregnant, Margaret saw it as vindication. Finally, the golden child had fallen. Taking you wasn't about saving the family's reputation. It was about having permanent proof of Emma's failure. But I wasn't Emma, I said. No, but you looked like her, sounded like her, even had her mannerisms without ever knowing her. Every day Margaret had to see her sister's ghost in her house, reminding her that even in death, Emma had something Margaret didn't, a child who inherited her talent. A week after the party, I met with Julia Chen at Random House. Sales of my books had skyrocketed due to the publicity, but more importantly, she had an offer. "We want your memoir," she said simply. "The true story of being raised by someone who hated you for existing. It's compelling, it's timely, and it's important." "Capitalizing on family tragedy?" I asked, though I was already considering it. "Telling your truth," Julia corrected. "How many people are out there living as the family scapegoat, believing they're worthless because that's what they've been told? Your story could help them." The memoir offer was substantial, more money than the Patterson Trust Fund would have ever provided. But it wasn't about the money. It was about controlling my own narrative for the first time in my life. 1 year later, I stood in Powell's City of Books in Portland, Oregon, signing copies of my memoir, The Family Mistake: A Story of Secrets, Lies, and Survival. The book had debuted at #1 on the New York Times bestseller list and stayed there for 16 weeks. The reviews called it devastating, necessary, and a masterwork of family dysfunction. My life in Portland was everything Connecticut hadn't been. I had a cozy apartment in the Pearl District with exposed brick walls and windows that let in the Pacific Northwest light. I'd adopted a rescue dog named Emma who slept at my feet while I wrote. I had friends who knew me as Skylar the writer, not Skylar the Patterson disappointment. Alexander and Madison visited regularly. Our relationship had fundamentally changed after the revelation. Without Mother's poisonous influence, they'd become the siblings I'd always wanted. Alexander had taken a position at Oregon Health and Science University, partly to be closer to me. Madison was considering a job at a Portland firm. "We spent 28 years as a fake family," Madison said during one visit. "Maybe we can spend the next 28 as a real one." Robert had followed through on every promise. The divorce from Margaret had been brutal but swift. She got the house and half the assets, but she lost everything that actually mattered to her status, reputation, and control. He'd moved to a modest apartment in Boston and started therapy, sending me letters every week that I sometimes read and sometimes didn't. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," he wrote in one. "I'm just asking for the chance to know who you really are, not who Margaret told me you were." We'd had dinner once, awkward and stilted, but it was a start. He'd read all my books by then, including the memoir, and cried through most of the meal. "I was there," he kept saying. "I was right there, and I didn't see any of it." Margaret had tried to fight the memoir's publication, threatening lawsuits and claiming defamation. But truth is an absolute defense against defamation, and I had 28 years of truth documented in excruciating detail. Her lawyers advised her to let it go, but letting go had never been Margaret's strength. She showed up at my Portland signing, looking diminished in a way that had nothing to do with age. Designer clothes couldn't hide the bitterness that had eaten her from the inside out. She waited until the end of the event approaching, when the bookstore was nearly empty. "Satisfied?" she asked, gesturing at the stacks of my books. "You've destroyed everything I built." "No," I corrected calmly. You destroyed what you built. I just showed everyone the foundation it was built on." "I gave you everything," she said, and she actually seemed to believe it. "You gave me a roof over my head and food to eat the legal minimum required of a guardian. You didn't give me love acceptance or even basic kindness. You gave me 28 years of emotional abuse disguised as parenting. Emma would be ashamed of you," she said, playing what she thought was her trump card. But Catherine had told me enough about Emma for me to know better. Emma would be proud that her daughter survived what you put me through. She would be proud that I became a writer like she wanted to be. She would be proud that I told the truth about what this family did to her and to me. Margaret left without another word. It was the last time I saw her. 6 months later, Catherine called with news. Margaret had sold the Greenwich mansion and moved to a small town in Florida where nobody knew her name. She'd become what she'd always feared: ordinary, invisible, forgotten. Meanwhile, the Emma Thompson Foundation that Alexander had established was thriving. We'd expanded it beyond teen mothers to include any young person rejected by their family. The foundation had helped dozens of kids find housing, education, and most importantly, acceptance. At the 1-year anniversary gala for the foundation, held in the same Ritz-Carlton ballroom where my life had changed, I gave a speech to 300 supporters who'd raised over $1 million for our cause. "A year ago in this room, I was called a mistake," I began. "Today, that mistake has turned into a mission. Every child deserves to be loved for who they are, not rejected for how they came to be." Judge Harrison was serving 2 years in federal prison for tax evasion related to the hush money payments. His wife, Patricia, had become one of the foundation's biggest donors, channeling her rage into resources for the children her ex-husband had tried to erase. The real transformation, though, was in the next generation. Alexander's daughter, born 6 months after the party, was named Emma. Madison, who'd married James in a small ceremony I was actually invited to, was pregnant with a boy they planned to name Sky. "We're naming our children after the family members who were erased," Madison explained, "so they're never forgotten again." The memoir had opened doors I'd never imagined. Speaking engagements at universities, consultations with family therapists, a documentary deal with Netflix. But the most meaningful responses came from readers who saw themselves in my story. One young woman wrote, "I'm 25 and just realized my family has been calling me their mistake my whole life. Your book gave me permission to leave." Another said, "I'm 58 and only now understanding that my mother's cruelty wasn't my fault. Thank you for putting words to what I could never explain." These letters, hundreds of them, sat in a box in my apartment. On hard days when the trauma tried to resurface, I'd read them and remember that pain shared is pain diminished. The National Book Award ceremony was held 2 weeks after the foundation gala. My third novel, the one that had been nominated when this all began, won in the fiction category. As I stood at the podium holding the award, I thought about teenage Emma writing stories in her notebook, dreams she never got to fulfill. "This award belongs to everyone who was told their dreams didn't matter," I said to the audience. "To everyone who was called a mistake, a disappointment, a waste. You are none of those things. You are worthy of love, respect, and the chance to become who you're meant to be." The applause was thunderous, but I wasn't done. 28 years ago, a 17-year-old girl named Emma Thompson died giving birth to me. She wanted to be a writer. She never got the chance. Every word I write is a tribute to her and a defiance of those who tried to bury both of us. Later that night at the after-party, surrounded by literary luminaries who saw me as a peer, not a mistake, I got a text from an unknown number. It was a photo of a young woman clearly from the late 1990s holding a notebook and smiling. Catherine's message followed, "Found this in an old album. Emma at 17, 2 weeks before she died. She would be so proud." I looked at my biological mother's face, so young and full of hope despite everything. We had the same eyes, the same stubborn chin, the same dreams. The difference was, I got to live mine. The family mistake had become a best-selling author, a National Book Award winner, and an advocate for rejected children everywhere. The real mistake had been Margaret's thinking, that shame could be hidden forever, that lies could masquerade as truth, that a child could be blamed for the circumstances of her birth. Standing in that New York ballroom, award in hand, surrounded by chosen family instead of blood family, I realized something profound. Margaret had been right about one thing at that anniversary party. I was this family's mistake, but not in the way she meant. I was the mistake in their perfect facade, the crack that let the light in the truth that set everyone free. Sometimes the best thing you can be is someone's mistake, because mistakes are how we learn, how we grow, and how we finally become who we were always meant to be. My name is Skylar Thompson Patterson, and I am nobody's regret. That's my story. The story of how one sentence at a family party unraveled 28 years of lies and set me free. If you're watching this, and you've ever been made to feel less than unwanted or like a mistake, please know that your worth isn't determined by how others see you. It's determined by how you choose to see yourself. Comment below if you've ever stood up to family members who tried to diminish you. What was your turning point? Your story matters and deserves to be heard. Please hit that like button if you believe in speaking truth to power, even when that power is your own family. Subscribe and hit the notification bell for more stories about overcoming family trauma and finding your own path. And please share this video with anyone who needs to hear that they're not alone in dealing with toxic family dynamics. Thank you for listening to every word, for being witnesses to my truth. Remember, you don't have to accept the role your family assigned you. You can write your own story, and it can be beautiful, powerful, and entirely yours. Until next time, this is Skylar reminding you that sometimes being called a mistake is just the beginning of becoming a masterpiece.